Okay, so my name is David McPherson, and I've been doing a series of spiritual videos, and this particular video is kind of the background for a lot of what the other videos are about, and it talks about what is the ascension and why should I care. This is a topic that in spiritual circles gets talked about a lot these days, and in some ways it's fairly complicated. But I'm going to try to give a kind of a general overview of what it's about using this diagram. I like to use diagrams because I feel like they help the brain to hold information in a more compact form so that it can retain it and remember it and access it and move it around more easily. So let's look at this diagram. So this is a diagram of some of the ways in which some of the hidden parts of our lives. So this represents the average person right here, this little stick figure. But everything else in the diagram are things that we don't normally see. But there are ways to validate the fact that they're there, but that we'll talk about that perhaps in another video. But essentially every being has an energy field, okay? And within that energy field, as they grow up and get older, they have certain experiences which are traumatic, scary, create shocks, highly charged emotions. And some of them are more severe and some of them are less severe. So if you look at the diagram, there's like some big red marks and then there's some smaller red marks. And there's quite a few of them spread out. And this is typical of what it's like to be human, is that we have experiences that are difficult to deal with. Now, because in our society, most of our societies, there is no real accepted normal way to process or release these emotions, they tend to build up, okay? And essentially what happens is the ascension process is where this situation, where this person is isolated, thinking that they're a human body, with all of these traumas stored within their energy field, okay? And by the way, I need to go back a step. When you have these kinds of traumas stored up in your fields, in order to protect yourself so that you're not constantly feeling the full force of everything, you build a kind of a barrier around yourself which desensitizes what you can feel, okay? And the good thing about that is that you're not feeling these intense emotions like this one or this one or this one to the full force every day. But in order to desensitize you, it also cuts you off from your sensitivity. And that also means that it's harder to feel things like joy, okay? Unconditional love. So there's a good and a bad part to this little green shield, let's call it, this protective barrier. And so the ascension process is where we go from this state into a state of greater sensitivity. And if you look at the diagram, there's this little dotted outline of a figure up here. This is representing your higher self or your soul. And that's a part of you that retains wisdom and knowing that is outside of this 3D reality. We all have this eternal part of ourselves, this beautiful part of ourselves that knows things and does not die. We return to it when we die, okay? And so that's why I had to make this figure as a dotted line, because in a way this figure is more real than this figure, because this figure is going to live and die in different lifetimes, whereas this figure is constant. But from our limited perspective, we think of this being as being more shadowy because we don't get to see it all the time. But really, this is the more permanent, more real part of ourselves, the higher self, the soul. And so what's happening is that we are gradually, when it says ascension, It's because we're actually in a process right now, a special time period, where we're moving more and more closely, more and more to the level of our higher self and soul. We're being called to ascend. So in the diagram, I put these little blue arrows here because that's what we're doing. We're moving upwards to try to embody more of the qualities of this part of ourselves. So to give you an example, one of the qualities that the soul has is unconditional love. So it loves you no matter what you do. It will be there for you. It sees the essence of who you are. It doesn't hold against you any mistakes that you might make. It's always there to love you, okay? And you can see why that would be a good quality. Whereas this figure tends to be conditional. Well, I love people when they treat me well, or I love myself when I do the right things, but then I really get upset with myself when I don't. So you see, we're moving from this level up to this level. That's why it's called the ascension, okay? If you want to get more technical with it, you could call this the 5D, and you could call this the 3D, okay? But essentially, we're moving upwards. Now, it gets you might think, well, what is that? What's the force that's moving us upwards? Well, that's what I want to talk about next. Part of why this is a special time is that there is more light and more energy flowing into our system. So you could call this cosmic light. I don't want to go into this because this gets kind of complicated, but essentially at any time there's a certain amount of, let's call it divine light or cosmic light that comes into our system. Now, around 2012, and leading up to 2012, the amount of that energy coming into our system started to go up dramatically. And this is all part of a cycle that happens over and over again, over thousands of years. But we just happen to be at this one point in the cycle where lots of energy flows into the system, okay? And that's good. That's a good thing in some ways, but it can be challenging as well, which is what I want to explain to you. So here's the average human again. We've already talked about this. And they have certain traumas and things in their life that they haven't really dealt with that have affected them. So let's say they got divorced, or they got an F on their report card, and they felt ashamed. Let's say that they were bullied, they were picked last to play softball on a team. All of these big and small, these kinds of things are stored away, okay? Now, in order to feel more, remember we have this little barrier? In order to feel more, we have to get rid of the barrier, okay? And remember, more of this cosmic light is coming in, this energy that helps you to move upward, right? The blue arrows, because this is where we want to go. We want to go up here. So when this light flows in, what happens is all these little traumas begin to come back into our awareness. In other words, we start feeling them. They get more intense. They're like little alarm clocks, and the volume seems to keep going up and up and up on them. And so you could experience this as anxiety. You could experience this as really intense anger or intense sadness. And oftentimes when you experience intense anger or sadness, if you look closely, you'll notice that it connects to a past memory, okay? That's because this is trying to get your attention so that you will feel it, because the only way to heal something in this kind of a system is to feel it. And when you actually feel it without judging it, and you love it, remember when we talked about unconditional love? Well, when you bring unconditional love to that younger version of yourself that felt like it didn't get treated well, then you're actually healing it, okay? You're not suppressing it, you're letting it come up. So what happens is, as we allow ourselves to feel these things, this barrier starts to go away, and some of these traumas start to go away. Because remember, when you feel something, you heal it. And let's go back to this. The more light that comes in, these things become more intense. And the reason they become more intense is so that we do something about it. Maybe we go to a therapist. Maybe we start meditating. Maybe we start doing yoga. Maybe we start journaling. Whatever it is, there are a lot of different ways to do this. We start working on these things, okay? Whereas if we were in a different time period, let's say it was like, I don't know, 1850, the amount of light coming in here would be less, and maybe we could tolerate more of these emotional traumas without having to work on them. But we're now at a stage where that is going to be very, very difficult. And so if you look around on the planet, there's a lot of things that look crazy and scary happening, and that's all part of this, okay? There's an intensification of all these emotional things that we need to get rid of in order to ascend, okay? So that's why there are a lot of things that look kind of crazy right now. But the good side of that is that more and more people are actually moving up. They're following these arrows up. And this is like the green and the red here. That's supposed to symbolize the barrier between your higher self and then your human self. The 5D and the 3D. So as you work on these things, remember we were erasing because I'm healing some. I'm going to heal this big one here. Let's get rid of that one. That was when I got bullied when I was 8 years old. I'm clearing that one out. And so what happens is we start to get an opening here. Okay? And this means that you're communicating with your higher self or your soul. Okay? And that feels amazing. Because if you know what unconditional love feels like, and it's like somebody giving you saying the phrase to you, you can't get it wrong. Whatever you do is perfect and beautiful. Now that would be hard for some people to imagine, but that's the shift that's happening. We're forgiven. So this part of you is moving up, 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 and connecting with this other part of you, which is the higher self or the soul. Okay? And that's what the ascension is about. Is essentially this shift that's happening. And the good part is that we're getting closer to these higher self, the soul, this more evolved part of ourselves. But the challenging part is in order to get there, we have to feel these things, and they feel really intense. So essentially what my wife and I do is that we help people to identify what these things are and how to heal them. And then we encourage them to find ways that work for them so that they can move upwards and connect with the higher self and the soul. And my wife, who's a channel, is connecting with beings like your soul and other beings that are ascended in these higher dimensions, and they bring little messages back to you to encourage you and to talk to you and to help you with things. And so, what is the ascension? It's essentially this movement from here to here. And why should I care? The reason you should probably care is because if you don't care about it and don't do anything about it, it's going to get really uncomfortable. Your life is going to feel really, really intense and scary. Okay? Because parts of you want to heal, and that's how they get your attention. Now, it's possible that you don't care about the ascension and you don't feel like this is very intense, then this video is not for you. It may be that later on in your life you may want us to come back and think about this, but for right now, I wouldn't worry about it. Okay. Thank you so much for your attention and sharing this, your valuable time with me to explain this concept, and I hope it was helpful. Blessings.